I used to think I needed approval for everything I did. Every decision, every step, every idea had to be accepted by someone else, or it felt or changed myself just to fit into spaces where I didn't even belong, just to hear words that made me feel like I was enough. But the truth is, it never lasted. The validation would come and then disappear, and I would be left emptier than before. At some point, I started questioning why I was living like that. Why was I handing over control of my life to people who were not living it for me? Why was I letting opinions shape my confidence, my choices, my identity? The answers weren't easy to face, but they were honest. I was afraid of being rejected. I was afraid of being unseen. So I tried to become what others wanted instead of becoming who I actually was. But something changed. Slowly, quietly, I started realizing that no amount of approval can replace self-respect. No amount of likes, praise, or acceptance can build a foundation that I don't build myself. I had been chasing something outside of me that was never meant to define me in the first place. Now, I don't move for validation. I don't speak for approval. I don't wait for permission to exist in my own life. If I like something, I pursue it. If I believe in something, I stand by it. If someone doesn't understand me, I don't shrink myself anymore to make it easier for them. I've learned that not everyone will understand your path, and that's not a problem to fix. Just reality. People see life through their own experiences, their own limits, their own fears. If I base my worth on their understanding, I'll keep changing forever and never actually become myself. There is a strange kind of freedom in not caring anymore. Not in a careless way, but in a grounded way. I care about my growth. I care about my peace. I care about becoming better than who I was yesterday. But I don't waste energy trying to convince people to see my value anymore. Because truthfully, the moment you stop chasing validation, you start building real confidence. Not the loud kind that depends on attention, but the quiet kind that stays even when no one is watching. That kind of strength doesn't break easily. I still make mistakes. I still doubt myself sometimes. But I don't run back to people to ask if I'm okay or if I'm enough. I sit with it, I learn from it, and I move forward. That's what growth looks like now. Don't care anymore about fitting into expectations that were never mine. I don't care about proving myself to people who already decided not to see me. I care about my direction, my discipline, my inner peace. And the more I let go of needing validation, the more I start to feel something I never had before, real confidence. Not borrowed, not temporary, mine. Seeking validation from others slowly turns into something most people don't even notice happening. It rarely starts as a problem. In fact, at the beginning it feels normal, even motivating. You share something you created, and when people like it, you feel good. You make a decision, and when others approve, you feel confident. You dress a certain way, speak a certain way, act a certain way, and when it gets accepted, it feels like you are on the right track. But over time, that external approval starts to become the measurement of your worth without you even realizing it. The mind begins to adjust itself around reactions instead of truth. You stop asking, do I like this? And start asking, will they like this? That shift is subtle but powerful. Because once your focus moves outside of you, your internal compass weakens. You begin to rely on feedback to feel stable. A good response makes you feel high and capable, while a negative or even neutral response can make you question everything about yourself. This creates an emotional cycle where your mood is no longer in your control, but in the hands of people who may not even understand your intentions. What makes this even more dangerous is that validation is unpredictable. One day you might receive attention and appreciation, and the next day you might be ignored completely. When your sense of value is tied to something unstable, your emotions become unstable too. You start chasing consistency in something that is naturally inconsistent. And the more you chase it, the more dependent you become. You begin to repeat actions not because they are meaningful to you, but because they previously brought approval. Slowly, your identity starts shaping itself around what gets the most reaction instead of what feels authentic. This creates an internal conflict that grows quietly, On the outside, you may appear confident or successful, but on the inside, there is a constant need for reassurance. You may find yourself overthinking simple things like what you said, how you looked, or how someone responded to you. You replay conversations in your mind, looking for signs of acceptance or rejection. You start filtering your personality, hiding parts of yourself that you think might not be liked. And without realizing it, you begin to disconnect from your real self. The hardest part is that validation never truly satisfies for long. Even when you get it, the feeling fades quickly and you are left wanting more. It works like a temporary relief, not a permanent solution. You might achieve something, receive praise, or gain recognition, but soon after, the mind shifts focus to the next source of approval. It becomes a loop that keeps moving but never arrives. No matter how much you receive from the outside, it never fully fills the space inside that is asking for self-acceptance. Over time, this dependence can quietly drain your confidence, not because you are incapable, but because you stop trusting your own judgment. You begin to second-guess decisions that you would have once made naturally. You delay actions waiting for reassurance. You avoid risks because you fear disapproval. And slowly, life becomes less about expression and more about approval management. But the truth is, no amount of external validation was ever meant to replace internal certainty. When you depend too much on others for approval, you unintentionally hand them authority over your emotional state. And most people are not even aware they are holding that responsibility over you. They are simply living their own lives, expressing their own opinions, while you quietly adjust yourself around their reaction. Breaking away from this pattern does not mean ignoring everyone or becoming disconnected from feedback. It means understanding that feedback is information, not identity. It means learning to separate who you are from how you are perceived in a moment, because perception changes, but truth does not need approval to exist. The goal is not to stop caring entirely, but to stop depending on it as the source of your worth. When you begin to shift that focus inward, something important happens. You start noticing your own thoughts again. You start feeling your own preferences without immediately filtering them through others. You begin to act from intention rather than expectation. And even though the urge for validation does not disappear overnight, it loses its control over you. It becomes quieter, lead dominant, no longer the force directing your choices. In that space, you slowly rebuild something stronger than approval. You rebuild self-trust. Changing yourself to gain approval often begins as a small adjustment, something that feels harmless and even smart at first. You learn how to behave in ways that make others comfortable. You adjust your tone so you don't sound too much or too different. You hide opinions that might create disagreement. You imitate habits, styles, or personalities that seem more accepted. At the beginning, it can feel like adaptability, like you are simply learning how to fit into different environments. But slowly, those adjustments stop being temporary and start becoming your default way of existing. Over time, the gap between who you are and who you are presenting becomes wider. You start to lose track of where the real version of you ends and the adapted version begins. You might still remember your preferences, but you hesitate to express them if they don't match what others around you expect. You begin to prioritize being accepted over being authentic. And in that process, parts of your identity start to fade quietly, not because they were taken away, but because they were never expressed enough to stay alive. One of the most subtle effects of this is how easily you begin to disconnect from your own voice. Decisions that should feel natural start requiring external approval. You stop trusting your instincts because you have trained yourself to check outward before acting inward. Even simple choices like what to say, how to respond, or what direction to take begin to feel uncertain without feedback from others. This dependence slowly weakens your ability to stand firmly in your own thoughts. The longer this continues, the more you start building a personality based on reactions rather than truth. You learn what gets approval, what gets laughter, what gets attention, and you unconsciously begin to shape yourself around those patterns. You might become more agreeable than you naturally are, more silent than you want to be, or more expressive than feels genuine, just because those versions of you receive better response. But in each case, It is no longer about expressing yourself. It is about managing perception. This kind of adaptation can create a confusing internal experience. On the outside, you may appear socially smooth, liked, or easy to get along with. But on the inside, there is often a quiet discomfort, a feeling that something is not fully aligned. You might not even be able to clearly define what feels wrong, but there is a sense of distance from yourself. It feels like you are participating in your own life rather than living it directly. The deeper issue is that when you constantly adjust yourself for approval, you begin to associate acceptance with worth. You start believing that the version of you that gets liked is the version that deserves to exist. And anything outside of that becomes something to hide or fix. This creates pressure to maintain a certain image, even when it does not reflect your real thoughts or emotions. You begin to monitor yourself constantly, filtering your words and actions before they even happen. Eventually, this can lead to emotional exhaustion. Keeping up multiple versions of yourself requires effort. You have to remember what you said to whom, how you acted in different situations, which version of you is expected in each environment. This mental management becomes tiring, even if you are not fully aware of it at first. You may feel drained in social situations without understanding why, because a part of you is always performing instead of simply existing. Another quiet consequence is the loss of self-trust. When you repeatedly override your own instincts to match external expectations, you begin to doubt your internal signals. You start believing that others know better than you about who you should be. Over time, this weakens your confidence in your own judgment. Even when you are alone, you may still second-guess yourself as if an invisible audience is still watching and evaluating. What makes this cycle difficult to notice is that it is often rewarded socially. People tend to appreciate those who are flexible, agreeable, and easy to accept. So the more you adjust yourself, the more positive feedback you might receive from the outside. But that external reward can quietly reinforce internal loss. You are praised for being something you are not, and that praise encourages you to continue becoming less of who you actually are. Breaking out of this pattern requires awareness that not every form of acceptance aligned with authenticity. Being liked is not the same as being real, and being real is not always immediately liked. There is a difference between adapting in healthy ways and disappearing into expectations. Healthy adaptation still preserves your core identity, while unhealthy adaptation replaces it. When you start recognizing this difference, you begin to reclaim parts of yourself that were once set aside. You might find old preferences returning, opinions resurfacing, or emotions that were previously suppressed becoming clearer again. At first, this can feel unfamiliar because you have been operating in a filtered version of yourself for so long. But slowly, the connection to your internal voice becomes stronger again. Rebuilding authenticity is not about rejecting everyone or refusing to adjust at all. It is about ensuring that adjustments do not erase identity. It is about allowing yourself to be consistent with your values even when environments change. It is about remembering that you are not meant to become a different person in every space just to be accepted in all of them. As this awareness grows, the need to constantly shape-shift begins to weaken. Start choosing honesty over performance even in small moments. And with each honest expression, you recover a part of yourself that was previously hidden. Real confidence does not come from being praised, liked, or constantly validated by others. It is not something that is given to you through compliments or approval, and is not built on how people respond to you in a moment. Those things can feel good, but they are temporary. They rise and fall depending on circumstances, opinions, and situations outside your control. Real confidence is something much quieter and deeper than that. It is built internally, through understanding yourself, trusting yourself, and standing by yourself even when there is no external support. When confidence is based on external praise, it becomes fragile without you realizing it. One positive comment can lift you, but one negative comment can pull you down just as quickly. You start measuring your worth based on reactions, and your emotional state begins to depend on how others perceive you. This creates a pattern where confidence is no longer stable. It becomes something you have to constantly refill from outside sources, And that dependency slowly weakens your sense of self over time. True confidence begins when you stop outsourcing your value to other people's opinions. It grows when you start making decisions based on your own understanding rather than waiting for approval. At first, this can feel uncomfortable because you are stepping away from a familiar pattern of seeking reassurance. You might feel uncertain or exposed because you are no longer relying on others to validate your choices. But that discomfort is part of the process of building something stronger inside you. As you begin to rely more on your own judgment, you start noticing something important. You don't actually need constant approval to function or to move forward. You can make a decision, act on it, and handle the outcome, even if no one is clapping for you or confirming that it was the right choice. This realization slowly builds inner stability. You start trusting your ability to think, to decide, and to adjust without needing external confirmation at every step. Real confidence is not about being perfect or never making mistakes. In fact, mistakes are a necessary part of building it. When you stop depending on validation, you also stop fearing failure in the same way. You begin to understand that failure is not a reflection of your worth, but a part of learning and growth. Each mistake becomes something you can learn from instead of something that destroys your self-image. This shift is important because it removes the emotional weight that used to come from trying to be constantly approved. Another important aspect of real confidence is consistency with yourself. It is the ability to act in alignment with your values even when no one is watching or rewarding you for it. When your actions are guided by internal principles rather than external reactions, you develop a sense of integrity that strengthens your confidence naturally. You don't need others to tell you that you are doing well because you can feel it within yourself. Over time, this internal alignment creates a quiet but strong sense of certainty. You stop overthinking every decision because you trust your own process. You stop needing constant reassurance because you are no longer disconnected from your own judgment. Even when others disagree with you or don't understand your choices, you are able to stay grounded because your confidence is not built on their agreement. This does not mean that external feedback becomes meaningless. It still has value, but it no longer defines you. You can listen to opinions without being controlled by them. You can consider criticism without letting it destroy your self-worth. There is a clear difference between receiving information and depending on it for identity. Real confidence allows you to stay open without becoming unstable. One of the clearest signs of real confidence is calmness in uncertainty. When you are no longer dependent on validation, uncertainty does not shake you as much. You are able to move forward even without guarantees or constant reassurance. You understand that clarity often comes through action, not before it. This makes you more willing to try, explore, and take steps without needing everything to be confirmed in advance. As this kind of confidence grows, your relationship with yourself changes. You start becoming less judgmental and more understanding of your own process. You no longer expect yourself to always be perfect or always be approved. Instead, you focus on progress, learning, and self-awareness. This creates a more stable internal environment where your worth is not constantly being questioned. Eventually, real confidence becomes less about feeling high or motivated all the time and more about being steady. It is not loud or dependent on attention. It does not disappear when people are silent or when recognition is absent. It remains present even in solitude. It is the quiet assurance that you can handle your life, learn from your experiences, and continue growing without needing constant external proof. In that state, confidence is no longer something you chase, it becomes something you live. Not everyone will understand your path, and that truth is something many people struggle to fully accept at first. There's a natural desire to be understood, to have others see your choices, your struggles, your direction, and immediately recognize their value. It feels reassuring when people agree with you or support your decisions, but it becomes painful when they don't. And because of that, many people try to shape their lives in ways that are easier for others to understand, even if it means moving away from what they personally believe is right for them. The reality is that every person views life through their own experiences, beliefs, fears, and limitations. No one is observing your journey from a completely neutral or fully informed perspective. People interpret your choices through the lens of their own understanding, which may not match your situation at all. What seems logical to you might seem confusing to someone else. What feels risky to them might feel necessary to you. What feels slow to one person might actually be the exact pace your growth requires. These differences in perception are unavoidable. Because of this, misunderstanding is not an exception in life, it is a normal part of it. If you wait for complete understanding from everyone around you before you move forward, you may end up delaying your own growth unnecessarily. Many paths that lead to meaningful outcomes are not immediately understood while they are being taken. In fact, some of the most important decisions in life are often questioned, doubted, or criticized at the beginning, not because they are wrong, but because they are unfamiliar to others. When you begin to accept that not everyone will understand your path, you also begin to free yourself from the pressure of constantly explaining or defending your choices. There is a difference between healthy communication and constant justification. Communication allows for clarity, but constant justification slowly turns into seeking permission. And when you fall into the habit of needing others to approve your direction, you unintentionally give away control over your own decisions. It can be difficult when people close to you do not understand your vision. Their opinions can carry emotional weight, and their doubts can sometimes feel discouraging. But even in those moments, it is important to remember that understanding takes time, and sometimes it may never fully arrive. Some people may only understand your journey after it has already produced visible results. Others may never fully understand it at all, not because your path lacks value, but because it does not align with their own way of thinking. This does not mean you are isolated or that you should ignore everyone's input. It simply means that understanding from others should not become the requirement for your progress. You can listen, you can reflect, and you can even adjust when necessary, but the final direction of your life cannot depend entirely on external comprehension. If it does, your direction will constantly shift based on changing opinions rather than stable intention. One of the challenges of seeking understanding from everyone is that it slows down decision-making. You start over-explaining your ideas, overthinking your steps, and waiting for reassurance before acting. This creates hesitation, and hesitation over time becomes stagnation. Meanwhile, people who accept that they may not be fully understood continue moving forward, learning through experience rather than waiting for approval. Progress often belongs to those who are willing to act even in the presence of misunderstanding. There is also a quiet emotional burden that comes with trying to make everyone understand you. It can feel like you are constantly translating your life for others, trying to make your thoughts fit into their expectations so they can approve of them. This can become draining because not every thought or decision is meant to be universally understood. Some parts of your journey are personal, experimental, and still developing. They are not always ready for explanation. As you grow, you begin to realize that being misunderstood is not always a sign that you are on the wrong path. Sometimes it is simply a sign that you are on a different path. Difference does not automatically mean error. It often just means individuality. And individuality cannot always be fully explained in a way that satisfies every perspective. When you stop relying on understanding from others as a requirement for action, something important changes internally. You start trusting your own process more deeply. You become more comfortable making decisions without needing them to be fully approved or immediately validated by others. You begin to recognize that clarity does not always come before action. Sometimes it comes after. And waiting for complete understanding can sometimes delay experiences that are necessary for growth. Over time, you also become less emotionally affected by disagreement. When someone does not understand your choices, you are able to see it as a difference in perspective rather than judgment of your worth. You stop saying yes to things out of pressure or fear of disappointing others. You become more aware of your limits, your energy, and your priorities. This leads to a more honest way of living, where your actions reflect your actual values rather than external expectations. Even simple decisions start feeling lighter because they are no longer carrying the burden of constant evaluation. Freedom also brings a change in emotional stability. When your sense of worth is not tied to approval, your emotions stop swinging so heavily based on outside reaction. A negative comment does not completely shake your confidence, and a positive comment does not define your entire identity. This balance creates a more steady internal state. You are no longer constantly rising and falling based on external feedback. Instead, you begin to experience a more consistent sense of self. There is also a deeper layer of freedom that appears in how you relate to failure and success. When you are seeking approval, success often feels like validation and failure feels like rejection. But when you step away from that mindset, both success and failure become part of the same learning process. Success is no longer about proving your worth to others, and failure is no longer about losing it. This removes a lot of emotional pressure and allows you to take more honest steps forward. As this continues to develop, you start realizing that much of what once felt like pressure was not actually necessary for your growth. Many of the limitations you experienced were not real barriers, but internal rules created to avoid judgment. Once those rules start dissolving, your thinking becomes more open. You begin to explore ideas, paths, and choices with less fear of how they will be perceived. Over time, this internal shift creates a noticeable difference in how you live. There is more clarity in your decisions, more peace in your thoughts, and more presence in your actions. You are no longer constantly performing a version of yourself for approval. Instead, you are simply living in alignment with what feels meaningful and right to you in each moment. In that state, freedom is not loud or dramatic. It is calm, steady, and grounded. It is the absence of unnecessary pressure, the release of invisible expectations, and the return of attention back to your own life. True strength is often misunderstood because many people associate it with noise, dominance, or visible confidence. In reality, the strongest form of strength is usually quiet. It does not need attention, approval, or recognition to exist. It is not built on proving anything to others, and it does not depend on external validation to feel real. Instead, it develops internally through consistency, self-awareness, discipline, and the ability to remain steady even when circumstances are uncertain or when no one is watching. One of the clearest signs of true strength is stability in the absence of observation. When there is no audience, no praise, and no feedback, most external motivations disappear. What remains is what is internal. People who rely on external validation often find it difficult to stay consistent when attention is removed. But quiet strength continues even in silence. It is not dependent on applause or recognition. It is rooted in personal standards that remain active regardless of external condition. This kind of strength is not built overnight. It develops slowly through repeated moments of choosing discipline over comfort and intention over impulse. It appears in small decisions that no one sees. The decision to keep going when motivation is low. The decision to stay consistent even when results are not immediate. The decision to act according to values rather than temporary emotions. These moments may seem insignificant individually, but over time, they shape a strong internal foundation. Quiet strength also shows itself in emotional control. This does not mean suppressing emotions or ignoring them, but rather understanding them without being controlled by them. It is the ability to feel disappointment without falling apart, to experience uncertainty without panic, to face criticism without losing self-worth. Instead of reacting instantly to every emotional trigger, there is space to observe, process, and respond thoughtfully. This creates a sense of inner balance that is not easily disturbed by external events. Another important aspect of true strength is independence from constant reassurance. Many people unknowingly depend on others to confirm their decisions, validate their feelings, or reassure them about their direction. While feedback can be useful, dependence on it weakens internal confidence. Quiet strength grows when you begin to trust your own judgment enough to move forward without needing repeated confirmation. It is not about rejecting guidance, but about not being controlled by the absence or presence of it. There's also strength in restraint. Not every thought needs to be expressed, not every reaction needs to be shown, and not every situation requires immediate response. The ability to pause, reflect, and choose your response instead of reacting impulsively is a powerful form of control. It prevents unnecessary conflict, reduces emotional chaos, and creates clarity in situations where others might act out of confusion or pressure. True strength is also deeply connected to self-discipline. Discipline is not just about productivity or success. It is about alignment with your own values even when it is difficult. It is what keeps you moving forward when motivation fades. It is what helps you maintain consistency when external encouragement is absent. Discipline builds trust within yourself, and that trust becomes one of the strongest foundations of inner stability. Another layer of quiet strength is the ability to remain unaffected by external comparison. In a world where it is easy to measure yourself against others, strength lies in focusing on your own path without constantly evaluating it against someone else's timeline or achievement. When comparison loses its control over your emotions, your energy becomes more focused and your decisions become clearer. You stop living in reaction to other people's progress and start living in alignment with your own direction. There is also strength in acceptance. Not acceptance of limiting beliefs, but acceptance of reality without unnecessary resistance. This does not mean giving up, but rather seeing situations clearly before responding to them. When you accept what is happening without denial or exaggeration, you are able to act more effectively. Resistance often creates confusion and emotional overload, while acceptance creates clarity and grounded action. Quiet strength is also reflected in how someone handles solitude. Being alone without feeling incomplete is a powerful indicator of internal stability. When silence does not feel uncomfortable and solitude does not feel empty, it means the mind is not dependent on constant external stimulation. In that space, self-reflection becomes possible and personal growth becomes more natural. Over time, this kind of strength becomes less about effort and more about identity. It is no longer something you try to display or prove. It becomes a natural way of being. You do not need to announce your discipline, your focus, or your resilience because it is already reflected in how you live consistently. In the end, true strength is not about being seen as strong. It is about being steady when there's no reason to perform strength at all. It is the ability to remain grounded in your values, calm in your decisions, and consistent in your actions, regardless of external noise. It does not demand attention, but it quietly shapes the direction of your life in a stable and meaningful way. In the end, true strength is not something that needs to be displayed or proven to anyone. It is not measured by how loudly you are noticed, but by how steadily you can stand when nothing is supporting you from the outside. It lives in the quiet choices you make every day, in the discipline you maintain when no one is watching, and in the calmness you hold when things around you are uncertain. Real strength is built in silence, shaped through consistency, and proven only to yourself over time.